Stand up. You don't look disabled, and that placard isn't fooling me.
Officer, I'm legally disabled. You are not allowed to question my medical condition.
You walk just fine. Show me proof or I'm arresting you for fraud.
I'm Dr. Elena Ross, Department of Justice. Call your supervisor now.
That badge is fake. Turn around. You're going to...
Officer Kyle Brannigan had been patrolling the affluent sector of Chicago's North Side for 6 years when he made a decision that would not only end his career, but also cost the taxpayers of Chicago a staggering $6.5 million. He was 29 years old, fit, aggressive, and entirely convinced that his badge gave him the ultimate authority to determine who belonged in his precinct and who did not. It was a bright, sunny Tuesday morning in late May, the kind of day that brings everyone out to enjoy the weather. But for Brannigan, it was just another shift spent hunting for what he called quality-of-life violators. He had no idea that the woman he was about to target, a woman he assumed was scamming the system, was actually Dr. Elena Ross, a 54-year-old senior advisor for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Dr. Ross wasn't just a lawyer. She was one of the nation's leading experts on the Americans with Disabilities Act. What Brannigan did next, interrogating her disability, mocking her condition, and arresting her for using a parking spot she was legally entitled to, would serve as a brutal lesson on the dangers of policing based on optics rather than law. Before we dive into the details, where are you tuning in from today? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We believe that shedding light on these injustices is the first step toward fixing them, and your support keeps us going. The Magnolia Promenade is one of those high-end open-air shopping districts that feels more like a manicured park than a strip mall. It's lined with European-style bistros, luxury boutiques, and wide sidewalks shaded by blooming magnolia trees. It was 10:15 a.m., and the promenade was bustling with the mid-morning crowd, retired professionals, wealthy stay-at-home parents, and business people conducting meetings over espresso. The sun was shining brightly, reflecting off the polished chrome of the high-end sedans and SUVs circling for parking. Parking at the promenade was notoriously difficult, a competitive sport for the local elite. Right in front of Le Jardin, the district's most popular outdoor cafe, lay two coveted accessible parking spots marked with blue paint and the international symbol of access. Dr. Elena Ross pulled her silver sedan into the first of these spots. At 54, Elena carried herself with an elegance that commanded respect. She was dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, her hair styled in a short, professional cut. To the casual observer, she looked like the picture of health and success. She stepped out of the car, moving slowly but steadily, and retrieved a cane from the passenger seat. She didn't use it for every step, but today was a bad day. Elena had been living with multiple sclerosis for 15 years. It was an invisible battle. Some days she felt fine. Other days her legs felt like they were encased in lead, and the nerve pain radiating through her back was excruciating. She hung her blue disability placard from the rearview mirror, a placard issued to her by the state after rigorous medical review, and locked her car. She was here to review a compliance brief for an upcoming federal investigation, seeking a quiet moment and a cup of herbal tea before flying back to Washington, D.C. She walked the 30 feet to a bistro table, sat down, and opened her tablet. She looked like any other successful professional taking a break. But to the eyes watching from across the street, her presence was an anomaly that needed to be corrected. Julianne Vance stood behind the glass door of Vance & Comey, the upscale boutique she managed and part-owned. Julianne was 38 years old, a woman who prided herself on knowing the character of the neighborhood. She was the head of the local business association, the kind of person who kept the non-emergency police line on speed dial and monitored the street like a hawk. She had been watching the parking lot for 20 minutes, frustrated that a delivery truck was blocking the loading zone when she saw Elena pull in. Julianne's eyes narrowed. She saw a black woman in a luxury car take the prime handicap spot. She saw the woman get out. She saw her walk to the table. In Julianne's mind, the cane was a prop. The slow walk was an act. "Look at that," Julianne muttered to her assistant, shaking her head in disgust. "Another one. Taking up the blue spots so she doesn't have to walk from the garage." Julianne had developed a fixation on what she called placard abuse. She had convinced herself that the city was overrun with fraudsters using their grandmother's placards to steal parking from the truly disabled customers she claimed to care so much about. But her concern was selective. When an elderly white regular parked there, Julianne smiled and waved. When Elena Ross parked there, Julianne saw crime. She watched Elena for another 5 minutes. Elena looked too young, too fit, too put together to be disabled. And though Julianne would never admit it aloud, Elena didn't look like she belonged at the promenade on a Tuesday morning. Bias is a powerful filter. It deletes nuance and inserts prejudice. Julianne didn't see a woman fighting a degenerative nerve disease. She saw a healthy person stealing a resource. Fueled by self-righteous indignation, Julianne picked up the phone. She didn't call the parking authority. She called the police. "Hi, this is Julianne from Vance & Combe at the promenade. We have a situation here. There's a woman who just parked in the disabled spot and she is clearly not disabled. She's strutting around taking up the space and she's being very dismissive to customers who actually need it." The dispatcher asked if the car had a placard. "It has one," Julianne said, her voice dripping with suspicion. "But it's obviously not hers. She's practically jogging to the cafe. It's fraud and it's affecting our business. We need an officer to check her credentials." The call was logged as a suspicious person parking fraud. Officer Kyle Brannigan received the dispatch while idling his patrol SUV 2 blocks away. The computer screen flashed the details. Complaint at Magnolia Promenade. Possible fraudulent use of disability placard. Suspect described as black female 50s causing disturbance. Brannigan smirked. This was his favorite kind of call. In his 6 years on the force, Brannigan had developed a reputation. His supervisors called him high activity. The community called him a harassment suit waiting to happen. He had 9 citizen complaints on his file, 5 for discourtesy, 4 for biased policing. All of them had been unfounded or exonerated by an internal system that prioritized protecting officers over correcting behavior. Brannigan viewed himself as a guardian of order. He despised people who worked the system. He had a particular disdain for people who used disability placards but didn't look disabled. In his mind, if you weren't in a wheelchair, you were probably faking it. And if you were a minority in a high-end shopping district, you were definitely worth a second look. He shifted his cruiser into drive and sped toward the promenade. "Show me en route," he radioed. "I'm going to clear this up." He didn't see himself as a public servant responding to a query. He saw himself as an enforcer on his way to catch a cheat. He arrived at the scene at 10:28 a.m., pulling his SUV up onto the curb right next to the bistro tables, creating a spectacle. He stepped out, adjusting his tactical vest, his sunglasses hiding his eyes, but not the sneer on his face. He scanned the area. Julianne Vance stepped out of her shop and pointed discreetly toward the woman in the navy suit. Brannigan nodded. He saw Elena Ross sipping tea, reading on her tablet. She looked relaxed. She looked professional. To Brannigan, that was the proof. Sick people don't look like that. Disabled people don't wear tailored suits and sit with that kind of posture. He marched over to her table, his hand resting near his belt, his posture aggressive and dominating. He didn't wait for her to acknowledge him. He didn't ask, "Good morning, ma'am." He just cast a shadow over her table and spoke. "Is that your vehicle in the handicap spot?" Brannigan asked, his voice loud enough to turn heads at the nearby tables. Elena looked up, startled but composed. She lowered her teacup slowly. "Good morning, officer. Yes, that is my vehicle." She gestured slightly to the silver sedan. Brannigan didn't blink. "You need to move it. Now." Elena paused, confused. "Excuse me, I have a valid placard displayed. I'm parked legally." Brannigan stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Yeah, I see the placard. I also saw you walk over here. That spot is for people with actual disabilities, not for people who don't want to walk across the lot. I'm not going to ask you again." Move the car, or I'm writing you a citation for fraud and impounding the vehicle. Elena Ross had spent 25 years in the legal system. She had drafted sections of the ADA guidance on law enforcement interactions. She knew her rights better than she knew the back of her hand. She sat up straighter, wincing slightly as a spasm of pain shot through her lower back pain Brannigan couldn't see and didn't care about. "Officer," she said, her tone even and firm, "I am legally disabled. The placard is registered to me. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act and state law, I am not required to demonstrate my disability to you to justify my parking." "You can run the placard number if you wish, but I am not moving my vehicle." Brannigan's face flushed. He wasn't used to people talking back, especially not black women he had already categorized as suspects. "Don't quote the law to me," he snapped. "I know the law. The law says you have to have a medical necessity. You look fine to me. You're walking, you're sitting, you're talking. If you want to stay in that spot, you need to show me proof. I want to see medical papers, something that proves you can't walk." This was a blatant violation of federal law. Officers cannot demand private medical history on a sidewalk based on a hunch. Elena knew this. "Officer, I am under no obligation to share my medical history with you. That is a violation of my privacy rights and the ADA. I suggest you run the license plate and the placard ID. It will come back to Dr. Elena Ross. That is me." "Dr. Ross?" Brannigan laughed, a short, mocking sound. "Right. And I'm the Surgeon General. Anyone can print a placard and a fake ID." The bistro was silent now. The wealthy patrons were watching. Some were recording. Julianne Vance was watching from her doorway, arms crossed, looking smug. Brannigan felt the eyes on him. He felt the need to win. He couldn't let this woman lecture him. "Last chance," Brannigan said, leaning down, his voice dropping to a growl. "Show me some identification that proves who you are and why you need that spot, or you're going in cuffs for obstruction and fraud." Elena realized this was escalating beyond a simple misunderstanding. This officer was dangerous. He was operating on ego and bias completely untethered from procedure. She reached into her tote bag. "I will show you my identification," she said calmly. "But I want you to understand that you are making a very serious mistake." She pulled out her leather credential case, the one with the Department of Justice seal embossed on the front. She opened it and held it up. The gold badge of the DOJ gleamed in the sunlight. Next to it was her photo ID, Dr. Elena Ross, Senior Advisor, Civil Rights Division, U.S. Department of Justice. "I am a federal official," Elena said. "I specialize in accessibility compliance. I am asking you to call your supervisor immediately." Brannigan looked at the badge. For a split second, hesitation flickered in his mind. But then the confirmation bias surged back. A black woman in a coffee shop with a DOJ badge. Impossible. It had to be a prop, just like the cane. "You expect me to believe that?" Brannigan scoffed. "You bought that online. That's a federal offense right there. Impersonating a federal officer." Elena was stunned. "Officer, look at the hologram. Look at the issue date. You can verify this with one call." Brannigan shook his head. "I don't need to verify a fake badge. You're refusing to comply with a lawful order to move your vehicle, and now you're trying to intimidate a police officer with false credentials." "I am not trying to intimidate you," Elena said, her voice rising slightly so the witnesses could hear. "I am identifying myself. I am asking you to follow procedure. Call your sergeant." "I'm done talking," Brannigan announced. He reached for his radio, but not to call a supervisor. "Dispatch, send me a transport unit. One female in custody." He moved around the table. "Stand up, you're under arrest." The crowd gasped. A man at the next table stood up. "Officer, she showed you a badge. You should check it." Brannigan spun around. "Sit down or you're next. This is an active investigation." He turned back to Elena. "Stand up." Elena knew that resisting physically would give him the excuse he wanted to use violence. "I am complying under duress," she stated clearly. "I have a degenerative nerve condition. Please be careful with my arms." She stood up slowly, her legs trembling. Brannigan didn't care about her warning. He grabbed her left wrist and twisted it behind her back with unnecessary force. Elena cried out a sharp gasp of pain as the torque triggered a flare-up in her shoulder. "Stop! You are hurting me!" "Stop resisting, then!" Brannigan yelled, playing to the cameras he knew were rolling. He shoved her against the bistro fence, pulling her other arm back. The handcuffs clicked shut. They were tight, pinching the skin. "Officer Brannigan," Elena said, reading his nameplate through the tears of pain in her eyes. "You are arresting a senior Department of Justice official for parking in a handicap spot that she is legally entitled to. You have refused to verify my credentials. You are violating my civil rights and the ADA. This will not end how you think it will." Brannigan ignored her. He grabbed her by the elbow and marched her through the tables. Julianne Vance watched with a satisfied smirk, believing she had just cleaned up the neighborhood. Brannigan paraded Elena past the gawking shoppers, her navy suit dusted with pollen from the fence, her hands bound behind her like a violent criminal. He opened the back door of his SUV and pushed her inside. The hard plastic seat was agony for her condition. "You can tell your story to the judge," Brannigan said, slamming the door. He got into the driver's seat, adrenaline pumping. He felt powerful. He had taken down a fraudster. He had shown the community he meant business. He had no idea that the fake badge he had tossed onto the front seat was about to bring the entire weight of the federal government down on his head. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. Elena sat in the back, breathing through the pain, mentally cataloging every violation. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a prosecutor building a file. When they arrived at the North District station, Brannigan pulled Elena out of the car and walked her to the booking desk. The station was busy. Sergeant Thomas Miller was the desk sergeant that morning. Miller was 55, a 30-year veteran who was counting the days to retirement. He knew Brannigan was a hothead, and he usually tried to keep him on a short leash. When he saw Brannigan dragging a well-dressed woman in a business suit toward the desk, his stomach tightened. "What do we have?" "Brannigan," Miller asked, eyeing Elena. She stood tall despite the handcuffs, her eyes blazing with a quiet, terrifying intensity. "Placard fraud, obstruction, resisting, and impersonating a federal officer," Brannigan recited proudly. "Caught her at the promenade. Refused to move her car, refused to show medical proof, then flashed a fake DOJ badge." Miller paused. He looked at Elena. He saw the quality of her suit. He saw the intelligence in her eyes. "Fake badge?" Miller asked. "Let me see it." Brannigan tossed the leather case onto the high counter. "Ordered it off the internet, probably." Miller picked up the case. He opened it. He felt the weight of the badge. He looked at the ID card. He saw the intricate security microprinting that was almost impossible to forge. He looked at the hologram that shifted perfectly under the fluorescent lights. Miller's blood ran cold. He had worked a joint task force with the feds 10 years ago. He knew what real credentials looked like. These were real. "Brannigan," Miller said, his voice trembling slightly. "Did you run this name?" "No, Sarge. It's fake. I didn't waste time." Miller looked at Elena. "Ma'am," he said, "what is your date of birth?" Elena gave it. Miller typed it into the terminal, his fingers moving fast. He accessed the Federal Liaison database. The screen populated instantly. "Ross Elena, clearance top secret, status active, agency depth of justice, Civil Rights Division." The file had a red flag notification required for any law enforcement contact. Miller stared at the screen. He felt like he was going to throw up. He looked at Brannigan, who was leaning against the counter looking bored. "You idiot," Miller whispered. Brannigan frowned. "What? Take the cuffs off," Miller barked, his voice rising to a shout. "Take them off right now." Brannigan blinked. "Sarge, she's a suspect." "She's a senior advisor for the United States Department of Justice, you moron," Miller yelled. "You arrested a federal civil rights official for parking." The station went silent. Every officer in the room stopped what they were doing. Brannigan's face went pale. The arrogance drained out of him like water from a cracked glass. He looked at the badge again. He looked at Elena. She wasn't a scammer. She was the law. Brannigan fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking so hard he dropped them. Miller came around the desk, snatched the keys, and unlocked the handcuffs himself. "Dr. Ross," Miller said. I cannot apologize enough. This is a severe misunderstanding." Elena rubbed her wrists. They were bruised and swelling. She looked at Miller, then turned her gaze to Brannigan. "This was not a misunderstanding, Sergeant," she said, her voice ice cold. "This was a targeted act of bias. Officer Brannigan refused to verify my identity. He demanded my private medical history. He used excessive force on a disabled woman after being warned of my condition. And he did it all because he decided I didn't look like I belonged." She reached for her credentials and put them back in her bag. "I want my cane. I want my phone. And I want the number for the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. I have a call to make." Miller scrambled to get her property. Brannigan stood there frozen, realizing his life as he knew it was over. He had just handed the DOJ a perfect test case for police misconduct on a silver platter. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. By that evening, the video from the bistro was viral. The image of a white officer twisting the arm of a black woman in a business suit while she calmly identified herself as a federal agent was played on every news network. The narrative was undeniable. Even a DOJ badge couldn't protect a black woman from the assumption of criminality. The Civil Rights Division didn't just investigate. They came down like a hammer. The lawsuit filed by Elena Ross named Officer Brannigan the City of Chicago and Julianne Vance. The city attorneys took one look at the evidence, the Bodycam footage where Brannigan mocked the badge, the witness statements, the medical records detailing the injury to Elena's shoulder, and practically begged to settle. They paid $6.5 million to Dr. Ross. It was one of the largest individual settlements for a non-fatal police encounter in the city's history. But the money was just the beginning. Officer Kyle Brannigan was fired within 3 weeks. The internal affairs investigation was scathing, citing 19 policy violations in a single hour. He was decertified by the state board, meaning he could never work as a police officer in Illinois again. At 29, his career in law enforcement was finished. He was left with a reputation that made him unemployable in security or public safety. Julianne Vance didn't escape either. The boutique's corporate owners, seeing the PR disaster, terminated her contract. She was sued for defamation and malicious prosecution. She lost her standing in the business association and eventually moved out of the neighborhood labeled as the woman whose prejudice cost the city millions. Elena Ross used the settlement money to establish a legal defense fund for people with invisible disabilities who face discrimination. She testified before Congress using her own arrest as the opening statement. "Disability does not have a specific look," she told the Senate Judiciary Committee. "It does not have a specific race. And until our law enforcement officers are trained to enforce the law rather than their own biases, no citizen is truly safe." The silence that followed her testimony was heavy with the weight of truth. It forces us to ask, how many people without DOJ badges have been humiliated, arrested, or worse, simply because an officer decided they didn't look the part? How many Brannigans are still patrolling, confusing their prejudice with probable cause? This story isn't just about a bad apple. It's about the rot in the barrel that lets them spoil. It's about the assumptions we make when we see someone in a space we think they don't deserve. Dr. Ross won her justice, but she carries the scars of that day. What do you think should be the penalty for officers who refuse to verify credentials? Should citizens like Julianne Vance be financially liable for weaponizing the police? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. These conversations are difficult, but they are necessary. Until next time, take care of each other and keep watching.